Hello again. This time I'm doing a response to McSoappy's recent vinyl thread. Vinyl community thread number 2 it's called. And the first question asks, what are some of the artists we are listening today that you think will become legendary? And there's this idea that's been going around that we probably aren't going to have legendary artists quite in the same way that we used to. And I agree with that, but I think artists can still become legendary in their own way. I mean, when I think of legendary, I think it can be kind of a relative term. So if I try to think back on the last decade of music and try to pick one artist that I think will kind of outlast most of them, I would have to say the Arcade Fire. They were kind of at the beginning of the whole indie movement that became popular with the album Funeral. I mean, that album got a bunch of critical praise, also did really well commercially. And it seemed like they might have started going downhill with the second album, but with the third album, once again they kind of rose up again. And I think they could continue to do so. I recently saw them live, and they were fantastic live. So I think they definitely have the power to keep going really, really strongly decades into the future. So yeah, I think Arcade Fire would be my pick for current artist that has the best chance at becoming legendary. Using legendary in a relative way. So the second question is, do you feel intimidated by your collection? And I'm gonna have to say, yeah, sometimes. My collection isn't as big as most of the ones that the people on YouTube here have. I've got about 400 pieces in my collection. I think that's a lot. And I do get intimidated by it sometimes. I want to choose something to play. And like you said, it's hard to pick just one thing at one time. But I mean, usually I can find a way to pick just one thing to play. Or if someone's over, or if I'm currently into one specific thing, then I can usually be pretty happy just settling on one thing. So I'd say yeah, sometimes I do get intimidated, but it doesn't really bother me. And it is never really a problem. So that's question number 2. The third one is the question: what are your top 5 artists or bands of all time? So I pulled out some vinyl for this one. Number 1, this is the album that really got me interested in music the way I am today. Radiohead, this is Hail to the Thief. Back in 2003, that is when music became basically the number 1 thing in my life. So this album specifically, Radiohead, has been my favorite since then, and I can't imagine a time when they ever will not be my favorite band. Even if they keep releasing stuff like The King of Limbs, I still love them to death. I can't remove them from number 1. So number 2, a band I just discovered in the last recent few years, Pavement. They've been one of my most listened to bands since I discovered them. And the first time I heard them, I actually didn't like them very much, but something about it kept me coming back for more. And eventually, they just really grew on me. And I got to see them on their recent reunion tour, and they did a fantastic job then. So they have 5 albums, all released in the 90s. It's Stephen Malkmus made several solo albums, but I have a hard time imagining that they're ever going to get back together and make another album, but that's okay. Those 5 albums they made are just incredible. So, number 3, Animal Collective. This is the album Merriweather Post Pavilion. This one came to mind when I was also thinking about legendary artists. But Animal Collective is another one that I've just really been digging in the last few years. I discovered them a couple years after Pavement, and I mean after Radiohead, that was before Pavement actually. And every one of their albums since, they have a couple early albums that are really noisy and experimental that I'm not too fond of, but most of their stuff is just incredible. Number 4, Björk. This is her album Medulla. Björk. She was another one with Radiohead that I discovered back in 2003 with this album. And I'd say she is mostly responsible for making me interested in experimental music, which I do listen to quite a bit today. You know, just stuff that sounds different, has its own kind of unique creativity. Björk definitely has that. And number 5, this one was actually really tough for me to choose. I don't really have a running list of favorite artists in my mind at any time. It's constantly changing. So I went with this one. This is Deep Chord. They're also known as Echo Space, and Deep Chord is actually playing in the background right now. I chose this one. I probably would have chosen something different. If I answered this last week, my number 5 pick would probably be something else, something different. But in this last week, I've completely fallen in love with Deep Chord and Echo Space. And this is Vintage Isle Sessions on vinyl. All of their stuff is just kind of comes in these plain sleeves. And it's really just dub techno, ambient-ish dub techno. And they are really responsible for getting me into the more subdued side of electronic music. This one, Vintage Isle Sessions, was one of the first dub techno releases that I really fell in love with. And I have not been able to stop getting more dub techno since. It's been in my ear almost constantly, and it's just like, I can't get enough of it. So if you ask me again in a month, I might say something different, but for now, Echo Space and Deep Chord at number 5. And the 5th question is 2 hobbies other than music. Music, you know, that's probably my number 1 hobby and has been for a long time. And it's probably really the only hobby that I could say I've had consistently throughout my life since I discovered it. But 2 other hobbies: playing tennis. I played tennis throughout high school, and I kind of stopped in college, but I recently got back into playing tennis again in the last couple months. So that's something I've been enjoying. And it was kind of difficult to choose 2 different hobbies, but I chose just kind of learning and studying about nature. This just because I've always been kind of interested in the nature of things. When I say nature, I don't necessarily mean like landscape. I'm also including human nature and just nature of the way things are, basically. So, you know, I just like thinking about nature, thinking about that kind of stuff. And I think one of the reasons is I always try to kind of understand the reasons why society is the way it is, why the world is the way it is. And when you try to understand it, it's so complex, so confusing. It's really difficult to get an understanding. So just kind of learning about nature, I think that's learning about the truth of the way things are. So I think I would call that a hobby. Anyway, that's it, just those 4 questions. So until next week, bye.